I remember the coffee in Elias Thorne's office more than anything. It was bitter, overbrewed, sitting in one of those archaic, brown glass carafes that seemed to belong to another century. A fitting backdrop, I suppose, for what was meant to be a somber, respectable gathering, but what quickly devolved into something far more theatrical. The air in that room, usually heavy, with the scent of aged paper and polished wood, on that day felt thick with unspoken resentments and thinly veiled greed. My name is Nate Sterling. I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I buried my father, Julian Sterling. For most of my adult life, I had considered him a titan, a brilliant, complicated man, distant and often cold, always calculating, but never, I thought, cruel, not truly. He was a self-made billionaire, the visionary behind Sterling Dynamics, a tech conglomerate that shaped industries from quantum computing to advanced AI. He moved through the world like a king, his presence demanding reverence, his decisions echoing with global impact. His ambition was a force of nature, consuming everything in its path, including, at times, his family. He built an empire, but at what cost to the human connections that should have mattered most? My relationship with him was never one of easy warmth. It was built on a foundation of intellectual sparring, shared ambition, and an unspoken understanding of drive. I followed him into the tech world, not into the flashy boardrooms or the cutthroat world of corporate mergers, but into the silent, intricate depths of cybersecurity. I became a specialized forensic data analyst, a digital detective. I reveled in the intricate puzzles of digital landscapes, uncovering hidden truths in lines of code, tracking data trails across the globe. My father respected that. He saw the precision, the quiet dedication, the strategic mind at work. We weren't best friends, we didn't talk about feelings, but there was a deep current of mutual, if unspoken, respect. He'd often call me, not for personal chats, but for insights into a complex data breach at one of his subsidiaries, or to brainstorm new encryption methods. These were our bonding moments, two minds converging on a technical challenge, a language only we truly understood. While Chloe and Leo were busy with their social calendars and superficial ventures, I was quietly ensuring the digital security of the very empire they stood to inherit, a fact they neither knew nor appreciated. In his final year, after a long, brutal battle with pancreatic cancer that slowly eroded his formidable intellect, we had tried, in our own awkward way, to find peace. The disease, relentless and unforgiving, stripped away the layers of his formidable persona, revealing a vulnerability I hadn't seen in decades. I called him weekly, sometimes daily, during his long bouts of chemotherapy. I visited him at his sprawling minimalist estate in the Hamptons when my work allowed, navigating the increasingly hostile gauntlet of his personal staff, now seemingly controlled by Evelyn. I sent him books, dense tomes on theoretical physics, biographies of forgotten innovators, anything that sparked the flicker in his fading eyes. He would call me back, sometimes just to grunt a thanks for the book, Nate, but other times, in moments of surprising clarity, he would engage, discuss quantum entanglement, or muse about the future of AI. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was mending. There were moments, brief and precious, when I saw glimmers of the man he might have been, stripped of his corporate armor, vulnerable and seeking connection. A man who, perhaps, regretted some of the choices he had made, the emotional distance he had kept. His funeral, a lavish affair orchestrated by my stepmother, Evelyn, and my half-siblings, Chloe and Leo, was quiet, respectful, held at a modern chapel overlooking the Atlantic. I stayed out of the way, a silent observer in the sea of black suits and solemn faces, assuming we were all there to grieve. But even then, I noticed the subtle cues. Evelyn's grief seemed performative, a carefully rehearsed display for the cameras. Chloe was more concerned with the angle of her veil in the paparazzi photos than the eulogies. Leo paced, checking his watch, as if rushing to his next lucrative deal. Their grief, if it existed, was overshadowed by impalpable anticipation, a hunger for what was to come. That assumption died the minute we sat down for the will reading. Elias Thorne's office was meticulously curated, a testament to old money and legal power. Thick oak furniture gleamed under the soft glow of brass lamps. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked untouched for decades. A heavy, antique grandfather clock ticked rhythmically in the corner, its deliberate chimes marking the inexorable march towards what I knew would be a pivotal moment. My stepmother, Evelyn, 55, a woman whose platinum blonde hair and perpetually pursed lips spoke volumes about her disdain for anything less than perfection, sat rigidly in an upholstered armchair. Her expensive silk scarf, a vibrant splash of color against her somber black dress, seemed almost defiant. She was an heiress in her own right, her family's fortune predating Julian's, and she carried herself with an air of inherited superiority, a subtle sneer always playing at the corners of her mouth when she looked at me. My half-sister, Chloe, 28, a social media influencer whose life revolved around curated aesthetics and brand partnerships, nervously tapped a perfectly manicured nail against the armrest of her velvet chair. The sound of faint, irritating click, click, click. Her eyes, usually darting for the best selfie angle, were now flitting between the lawyer and her reflection in a framed legal degree on the wall, as if seeking reassurance. My half-brother Leo, 35, a venture capitalist whose smug self-assurance was almost palpable, wouldn't meet my gaze. He adjusted the cuff of his bespoke suit, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture that screamed feigned nonchalance, an attempt to project an image of calm professionalism that belied the nervous energy humming beneath his polished exterior. The tension in the room was a tangible thing, a coiled spring ready to snap, thick enough to cut with a knife. Elias Thorne, a tired man in his late 60s with deep bags under his eyes and a comb-over that fooled absolutely no one, began reading. His voice was a monotone drone, designed for impartiality, but every word felt weighted, pregnant with unspoken meaning. I braced myself for the usual mix of sentiment and estate itemization. At first, everything sounded standard. The vast Sterling estate property in the Hamptons was to be sold, its immense value added to the general trust. Personal possessions, Julian's art collection, his rare books, his collection of vintage cars would be distributed according to preference forms, assuming no disputes. Evelyn was given control over a newly established charitable foundation in Julian's name, one that would focus on cultural preservation, a vague mandate that could be twisted to serve almost any purpose. Chloe would receive the exclusive penthouse apartment in Tribeca, a property valued at 8 figures, along with a substantial trust fund for her lifestyle brand. Leo would receive the sprawling private island retreat in the Caribbean, a true paradise, alongside a massive investment portfolio. Then, the air in the room changed. It became colder, thinner, suddenly difficult to breathe. The lawyer reached the end, his voice unwavering, and said, "And with that, the estate is settled. The will includes no other named beneficiaries." No mention of me, not one line, not even a sentence about why. Just nothing. My name, Nate Sterling, was conspicuously absent from the meticulously typed pages. It was as if I had never existed, never been his son, never been part of his life, never shared those quiet moments of connection in his final year. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where my identity should have been. Silence sat heavy in the room, thick and suffocating. I didn't move. I didn't ask questions. I didn't frown or protest. My face was a mask of carefully constructed neutrality, honed by years of concealing emotion during high-stakes investigations. My heart, however, pounded a furious rhythm against my ribs, a primal thrum of betrayal and indignation. But I noticed everything. Evelyn gave the faintest, almost imperceptible smirk, a flicker of triumph in her cold eyes, a predatory satisfaction that made my stomach churn. Chloe let out a breath she'd been holding, a nervous, relieved sigh that was quickly masked by a performative sip of water, her fingers twitching, eager to reach for her phone and update her followers on her newfound fortune. Leo, who had remained impassive through the entire reading, allowed a slow, knowing exhale, the kind of breath you release when something goes exactly the way you planned, when a complex scheme has executed flawlessly. He finally met my eyes, a fleeting, almost imperceptible flicker of condescension, as if to say, "Game over, Nate. You always were the outsider. And now, you're officially out." That was their first mistake. They assumed my quiet nature meant I was weak, that my distance from their opulent daily charades implied I wouldn't fight. They saw me as a relic, a man who preferred the silent hum of servers to the glitzy roar of high society. a former soldier playing with obscure tech, incapable of understanding the ruthless game they played. They miscalculated my patience for their arrogance, my tolerance for their greed, and my capacity for strategic retaliation. But I had been preparing for this. I knew Julian Sterling, and I knew his family. I understood the language of deception, and I spoke it fluently. I reached down beside my chair and tapped once on the shoulder of the man who came with me. He stood calmly, deliberately, and placed a slim, unassuming folder on the polished mahogany table. The almost imperceptible rustle of the paper was the only sound in the tense silence. "I'd like to raise an objection to the validity of this document," he said, his voice firm but polite, a low rumble that instantly commanded attention. He wasn't loud, but his words resonated with an authority that silenced the room more effectively than a shout. "On behalf of Mr. Nate Sterling." Elias Thorne blinked. He adjusted his glasses, peering over them with a mix of surprise and irritation. His brow furrowed. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice sharper now, a hint of annoyance creeping in. "This is a meticulously prepared, notarized document. On what grounds could you possibly object?" "My name is Maxwell Vance," my lawyer said, his presence suddenly dominating the room, radiating an aura of quiet power. Max Vance was renowned in legal circles, a quiet force known for dismantling complex cases with surgical precision. He was a sharp-witted legal eagle who typically worked for Fortune 500 companies, a man whose reputation for unraveling corporate fraud was legendary. I had called in every favor, leveraged every connection from my shadowy world of digital forensics to secure his services. He was my secret weapon, the legal battering ram I had spent months sharpening. "I represent Mr. Sterling in this matter. We are in possession of a prior version of the will, notarized and signed, in which my client is listed as a named beneficiary. Furthermore, we have cause to believe that the updated version was executed during a period in which Mr. Julian Sterling's father was legally considered medically unfit to amend the legal documents." You could have heard a pin drop. Even the bitter coffee in the carafe seemed to stop steaming, suspended in the sudden, absolute silence. The air crackled with unspoken tension. The seeds of my suspicion had been planted subtly, almost imperceptibly, in the final months of my father's life. A month before Dad passed, our phone calls had become shorter, more hesitant, almost scripted. I'd ask a question, a simple query about his health or his day, and he'd pause, an uncharacteristic delay, like someone else was in the room, whispering instructions or coaching his responses. Sometimes the calls went unanswered altogether, followed by a terse text from Evelyn about his fatigue. When I asked Chloe or Leo if he was okay, if his mind was still sharp, they'd dismiss me with a wave of their hand. "He's tired, Nate. The treatments are exhausting. You don't need to bother him every week. We're handling everything." Evelyn would offer a saccharine smile and say, "Julian needs his rest, dear. He's fragile now, very delicate. We're protecting him from unnecessary stress." Their voices, normally laced with a performative concern, now held an almost dismissive edge, a subtle implication that I was a nuisance, an outsider who couldn't possibly understand the intricacies of their family struggle, let alone their father's complex medical condition. They treated me like a distant relative, a curiosity they tolerated but didn't truly accept. The last time I saw him in person, I brought him a first edition biography of an obscure aerospace pioneer he admired, a figure who had revolutionized rocketry with limited resources, a story that resonated with Julian's own entrepreneurial spirit. He didn't remember our last conversation from the day before, a detailed discussion about the book's author. He seemed foggy, a little scared, his eyes clouded with confusion, but he still managed a weak smile when I handed him the book. He held it in his hands, tracing the cover with a shaky finger, a fleeting moment of recognition in his eyes. That was the last real moment I had with him. A week later, he was gone. Weeks after his death, when the dust of the funeral had settled and the vultures of the estate began to circle, I got a message from Maria, one of the private nurses who had been caring for him round the clock at the Hamptons estate. Maria wasn't supposed to contact me directly. She had been hired by Evelyn and was fiercely loyal to Julian, but her conscience was stronger than her fear of retribution. "Mr. Sterling," she said in a low, hushed voice over an encrypted line I had provided her with months ago for emergency contact reasons, a contingency I always put in place for vulnerable clients. You should check in on your father's legal paperwork. Something's changed. I'm not sure it's right. His mind, it wasn't always clear in those last few weeks. He was confused. They had him sign things. Her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and conviction. That was the moment the hairs on my neck stood up. The forensic data analyst in me, the part that lived for patterns and anomalies, roared to life. I thanked her, my mind already racing, processing the implications of her hesitant words, the potential depth of the deceit. I didn't ask more. I didn't want to get her in trouble, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. Maria's honesty, her quiet bravery, was a direct contrast to the insidious web of deceit I was beginning to unravel. My father and I weren't best friends. We didn't talk about feelings, not really. But he had written me an email 6 months earlier, one that I had saved, tucked away in a secure digital vault, an automatic backup from his main server that I had, coincidentally, helped him set up. In it, he wrote, "Nate, I'm sorry for the years I wasn't around. You turned out better than I deserved. You have a quiet strength, a steadfastness that I've always admired. When I get things finalized this year, I'd like to make sure you're part of what I leave behind. A significant part. You've proven yourself in ways your siblings never could, with integrity and true grit. You understand legacy, not just inheritance." I read that email again, the words echoing with a poignancy that brought a lump to my throat. It was Julian Sterling, stripped bare of his usual formality, speaking from a place of genuine, if belated, affection and respect. Then, I called a friend, an old college roommate who now worked in high-stakes estate law, a man named Marcus Thorne, who was distant kin to Elias. "You need to get ahead of this, Nate," he said, his voice grim, quietly. "Your father's affairs are complicated, and his family, well, they're complicated too." That's how I met Maxwell Vance. Max was a soft-spoken, razor-sharp estate attorney with a specialty in disputed wills, often involving high-net-worth individuals and complex family dynamics. He had a reputation for being relentless yet ethical, a rare combination in his field. We had coffee that week in a discreet corner booth of a bustling downtown cafe, far from the prying eyes of the legal world. I explained what I knew, the subtle shifts in my father's demeanor, the evasiveness of Evelyn, Chloe, and Leo, Maria's whispered warning. I laid out the timeline of Julian's cognitive decline, the increasing isolation, the sudden changes in his personal staff. Max didn't react with drama. He just nodded, made meticulous notes in a leather-bound journal, and asked me 3 precise questions that cut through the noise. "Do you have any documented communication from your father about his wishes that predates his severe decline? Has he been formally declared medically unfit in the past 12 months by an independent medical professional? Who currently holds general power of attorney over his affairs?" The answers were, yes, I have an email. Yes, I believe so, based on observations, and Maria's tip, though it might not be official yet. And Leo does. He assumed it about 3 months ago. Max blinked slowly. His eyes, usually sharp and penetrating, now held a faint, almost imperceptible gleam of satisfaction. "That," he said, a faint smile touching his lips, "is the trifecta. We'll need records, comprehensive medical notes, all relevant bank statements from the past 6 months, and a time-stamped, notarized copy of the previous will." I had the last one. It was scanned and saved from a conversation I had with my father the year prior. He'd wanted me to review it not for my portion, but for a complex clause about a new charitable foundation he was considering, something about funding breakthroughs in renewable energy and sustainable tech, a vision that resonated deeply with my own values. At the time, I thought it was just a courtesy, his way of seeking my input on a technical matter, a final attempt to connect on a shared interest. Now, it was a lifeline, a digital breadcrumb left by my father, a silent testament to his true intentions, his real legacy. The medical note came next, harder to acquire but crucial. Max filed a records request under the pretext of routine estate planning, using a carefully worded letter that bypassed initial resistance. Within weeks, we had it. A detailed report from a neurologist dated just 6 weeks before Dad's passing. It stated, unequivocally, that he exhibited marked cognitive decline with evidence of severe confusion and memory fragmentation. Patient frequently disoriented to time and place, unable to make complex decisions without significant prompting or guidance. In short, my father legally lacked the capacity to alter major documents. His mind, once a steel trap, had succumbed to the ravages of his illness, leaving him vulnerable to manipulation. That should have been the end of it, the undeniable proof. But Max Vance knew better. Just because something's illegal doesn't mean it won't be processed, he said, his voice grave, a seasoned veteran of countless legal battles. Especially when vast sums of money and powerful individuals are involved, individuals who believe they are above the law, we need to have everything lined up, airtight, and wait for the precise moment to strike. We can't let them hide behind legal loopholes or their powerful connections. We need to expose their scheme publicly and irrevocably. That moment was the will reading. I didn't tell Evelyn, Chloe, or Leo I was bringing representation. I maintained my usual quiet, somewhat detached demeanor, letting them believe I was too grief-stricken, too intimidated, or simply too oblivious to challenge their brazen actions. Max posed as a distant family friend, a quiet observer I had invited for moral support. He dressed in a plain charcoal blazer, carried a soft leather brief that looked more like a portfolio than a legal document holder. He didn't even bring a briefcase, just one thin folder. Inside, the earlier version of the will, the damning medical records, my father's poignant email, and the meticulous financial activity logs I had compiled, cross-referencing every suspicious transaction initiated by Leo and Evelyn in the last few months of my father's life. I had used my forensic skills to trace the flow of funds, identifying unusual transfers to offshore accounts and shell corporations that directly benefited them, even as Julian's health deteriorated. Everything was time-stamped. Everything was airtight. And still, until the very second my name was left off the will, I didn't fully believe they'd go through with it. It felt surreal, like watching a meticulously planned heist unfold in slow motion, only this time I wasn't the one planning it. I was the one being robbed. But I was also the one holding the security footage, silently documenting every false move, every predatory glance, every dismissive gesture. My quiet observation, the very thing they took for granted, was about to become their undoing. Looking back, there had been so many signs, each one a flashing red light I had, in my misplaced hope or naive trust, initially dismissed. Leo was always talking about streamlining Dad's assets, consolidating portfolios, moving funds to new obscure accounts, ostensibly for tax efficiency or better returns. Chloe had started hinting that the private island was too much for Dad to manage and should just stay in the family, implying she was the rightful owner. Evelyn had subtly pushed for control over Dad's personal staff, isolating him from longtime employees like Maria, who might notice changes in his cognitive state or question sudden legal directives. She even replaced his trusted private chef with one of her own, a clear attempt to control who Julian saw and what he consumed, potentially even medication. I had dismissed it all as normal end-of-life stress, the machinations of a family grappling with a dying patriarch. His vast fortune, a powerful magnet for their basest instincts. But now, I saw it clearly. They thought they could rewrite history, make me disappear from the narrative, erase my existence from Julian Sterling's legacy, claiming his life's work as their own. And because I'd been quiet, distant, not as involved in their day-to-day socialite charades, they assumed I wouldn't fight, that I would simply accept their imposed reality. But here's the thing about quiet men. They observe, they listen. They don't waste their energy on empty rhetoric, but on meticulous preparation. I may not have shown up for every lavish charity gala or attended every superficial family planning meeting, but I was the one who fixed Dad's custom-built server when it crashed in the middle of winter, remotely troubleshooting it for hours while they worried about their social calendar. I was the one who flew across the country when he slipped on ice and wouldn't tell anyone, navigating his complex medical needs because Chloe and Leo were too busy with their own lives, preoccupied with their latest expensive purchases or social obligations. I was the one who stayed overnight in that sterile hospital chair when he had a bad reaction to his chemotherapy, holding his hand, listening to his rambling thoughts, because Evelyn had a prior engagement and Chloe had a spa appointment. I was the one who listened when he spoke of regret, of wanting to make amends, of wanting his legacy to be more than just money. They thought paperwork was power. They thought their carefully crafted lies, Their manipulation of a dying man would go unchallenged. They thought they had outsmarted everyone, especially me. I knew better. I brought a lawyer, and I brought the truth, backed by irrefutable data. The moment Maxwell Vance placed the folder on the table, the energy in the room shifted dramatically. It was as if an invisible force field had just snapped, shattering their smug complacency. Evelyn's perfectly composed facade cracked, a flash of pure panic in her eyes as she subtly recoiled, as if someone had just whispered a deadly threat directly into her ear. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Chloe's nervous tapping stopped dead, her eyes wide with a sudden dawning horror. Leo, for the first time, looked genuinely rattled, his self-assured posture crumpling, his shoulders slumping, a vein throbbing visibly in his temple, a silent scream of recognition on his face. He knew. He knew exactly what was in that folder. He just hadn't expected me to bring it. He hadn't expected me to fight back. Elias Thorne, the estate lawyer, leaned forward, peering over his glasses at the documents. Max slid gently across the polished table. He picked up the first page, his fingers trembling slightly as he read the heading. "What exactly am I looking at?" he asked, his voice laced with a newfound caution, the tired resignation replaced by a flicker of professional alarm, a dawning comprehension of the catastrophic implications for his firm. Max Vance was calm, utterly composed, a legal predator scenting blood in the water. His voice remained even, precise, yet each word was a hammer blow. A notarized version of Mr. Julian Sterling's will, dated 11 months ago, he stated, his gaze unwavering, fixed on Elias Thorne. It names my client, Nate Sterling, as a significant beneficiary, specifically inheriting the controlling interest in Sterling Dynamics, the very heart of Mr. Julian Sterling's life's work, as well as a substantial portion of the liquid assets and the property in Aspen, Colorado, a property my client shared many fond memories with his father. A sharp, choked gasp erupted from Chloe, a sound that was a mixture of outrage and terror. Her carefully applied makeup seemed to run, suddenly, as unshed tears welled in her eyes. Evelyn's face went ghastly white, her composure utterly shattered, her meticulously arranged features contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and disbelief. Leo, who had prided himself on his unflappable poker face, finally lost it. He slumped back in his chair, visibly shrinking, his once confident posture crumbling, his eyes fixed on the damning documents, his mouth agape. "This is outrageous," Evelyn shrieked, finally breaking the stunned silence with a guttural, furious cry. "Julian would never do such a thing. He hated Nate. He told me. He explicitly stated he was cutting him out of everything. This is a forgery, a malicious act." Her voice rose in pitch, bordering on a hysterical scream. Max's expression didn't change, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Evelyn's wild accusations. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice cutting through her shrill histrionics with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "We also have sworn testimony from independent medical personnel, supported by detailed medical records and physician's notes, indicating that Mr. Julian Sterling exhibited severe cognitive decline, rendering him legally incapacitated for over 2 months prior to the execution of this new will. Any changes made during that period are, by law, null and void. Furthermore," he continued, pulling out another document, a thick stack of papers meticulously organized, "we have comprehensive forensic financial logs detailing suspicious transactions and asset transfers initiated by Mr. Leo Sterling and yourself, Mrs. Sterling, during that same period, indicating potential elder abuse, blatant financial fraud, and a deliberate scheme to defraud my client of his rightful inheritance." He laid out a complex diagram of shadowy offshore accounts and shell companies I had painstakingly uncovered, showing the illicit flow of funds directly into their personal accounts. The evidence was irrefutable, undeniable. Leo finally found his voice, a strangled whisper, barely audible over Chloe's whimpering. "This is a fabrication! Nate, you're trying to steal from us! You always wanted what we had!" His voice was raw with panic, his carefully constructed bravado utterly shattered. "On the contrary, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the furious satisfaction churning within me. my gaze fixed on Leo's terrified, desperate eyes. He had always prided himself on his cunning, on his ability to manipulate situations to his advantage. Now, he was caught, exposed. I'm merely ensuring my father's true wishes are honored, his final, lucid intentions respected. Unlike some, I don't need to rewrite history or prey on the vulnerable to get what I deserve. My father left me a legacy, not just an inheritance, and I intend to uphold it. Elias Thorne, now fully alert, his initial irritation replaced by a grim professional horror, was rapidly flipping through Max's documents, his face growing paler with each page. His experienced legal mind processing the catastrophic implications for his firm if this went public. He was a seasoned professional, and he recognized the ironclad nature of the evidence, the meticulous detail, the irrefutable truth. He looked at Evelyn, Chloe, and Leo, then back at Max and me, his eyes now filled with a mixture of professional respect and a dawning sense of grim inevitability. I'm afraid, Mr. Vance has presented compelling, irrefutable evidence, he stated, his voice now firm, authoritative, that calls into question the validity of this most recent will. Given the gravity of these accusations, the comprehensive financial documentation, and the damning medical documentation, I have no choice but to recommend we proceed immediately with the prior will and initiate an immediate formal investigation into the circumstances surrounding the alleged changes and the suspicious financial activities. This is beyond my office's jurisdiction now. This will require federal involvement. Chloe burst into anguished tears, her perfect mascara streaking down her face, ruining her carefully crafted image, the facade finally cracking under the immense pressure. Evelyn looked like she might spontaneously combust, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, her face a mask of pure, impotent rage and desperate terror. Leo slumped back in his chair, defeated, the color drained from his face, his smugness replaced by utter despair. His eyes, fixed on me, held a mixture of hatred and a chilling, dawning realization of the depth of my preparation. Their carefully orchestrated heist had been foiled by the quiet man they had underestimated, the brother they had tried to erase from their lives, the digital ghost who had been watching their every move. The ensuing legal battle was swift and brutal, a public spectacle that tore through the Sterling family's carefully constructed image like a Category 5 hurricane. My father's email, his prior will, and the damning medical records, combined with the comprehensive forensic financial analysis I provided, a detailed map of their illicit activities, proved to be an insurmountable wall of evidence. Evelyn, Chloe, and Leo were forced to concede, their attempts to challenge the previous will falling flat against the mountain of irrefutable proof. The financial fraud charges against Evelyn and Leo, stemming from the assets they tried to siphon off during Julian's cognitive decline, led to a separate, equally humiliating federal investigation. Their reputations, built on a foundation of inherited wealth and superficiality, crumbled in the unforgiving glare of the media. Every news outlet, from the major networks to the online tabloids, dissected their downfall with morbid fascination. They learned the hard way that true power doesn't come from wealth or status, but from integrity and purpose. Their names, once synonymous with opulence and influence, became shorthand for greed and betrayal. For me, the victory wasn't about the money or the power of Sterling Dynamics. It was about vindication. It was about honoring my father's true intentions, ensuring his legacy was built on innovation and ethical leadership, not greed and betrayal. It was about exposing the truth, even when that truth was painful and brought public scrutiny to my own family. I took the reins of Sterling Dynamics not as a ruthless corporate titan seeking to expand an already vast fortune, but as a strategic guardian. I restructured its divisions, redirected its vast resources towards ethical AI development, sustainable tech, and responsible data management, aligning it with my father's original, more idealistic vision of using technology for human progress, not just profit. I established a new foundation, using a significant portion of the inheritance, dedicated to supporting caregivers and families dealing with cognitive decline, ensuring others wouldn't suffer the same exploitation Julian did. It was a form of atonement, a way to mend the broken pieces of my father's final years, to turn a personal tragedy into a force for good. My relationship with Evelyn, Chloe, and Leo evaporated, replaced by a cold, permanent silence. They tried to salvage what they could of their social standing, but the taint of scandal clung to them like a shroud. I heard through the grapevine that Leo's venture capital firm struggled, his reputation for ruthlessness, now viewed as reckless, not cunning, his former clients abandoning him. Chloe's sponsorships dried up, her perfectly curated online life exposed as a fragile facade, her followers dwindling as her carefully constructed image disintegrated. Evelyn retreated from public life, her Hamptons estate becoming her gilded cage, a monument to her greed and her ultimate defeat. They were left with the hollow shells of their ambition, stripped of the power they had so desperately craved. My life, once defined by quiet solitude and intricate digital puzzles, transformed. I became a leader, navigating the complex world of corporate ethics and innovation. I learned that true strength wasn't about dominating others, but about standing firm in your convictions, protecting the vulnerable, and ensuring justice. I learned that family isn't just about blood, but about respect, honesty, and unwavering support, even when the relationship is complicated and fraught with unspoken resentments. The path to leadership was challenging, forcing me to step out of my comfort zone, to engage with people on a different level, to speak for those who could not speak for themselves. But it was a path I walked with purpose and integrity. And sometimes the quiet ones, the ones underestimated and dismissed, are the very ones who hold the key to the truth, the ones who deliver the most profound lessons. My father, in his final clarity, saw that. He left me the tools, the digital breadcrumbs, the quiet understanding of his true intent. And in his death, he showed me, and the world, who I truly was, not just a son, but a guardian, a force for justice, a man who refused to be written out of his own story. The quiet moments with him, the ones they never witnessed or valued, were the ones that truly mattered, forging a bond stronger than any legal document or financial scheme. This story isn't just about a will or a family feud. It's about perception and reality, about the unseen battles fought in the quiet corners of lives, and about the unexpected power that lies within us when we choose to stand up for what's right. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or betrayed, remember that your quiet strength can be your most powerful weapon. Your integrity is your shield, and your truth, when revealed, can shatter the most carefully constructed deceptions. What you do in silence, the preparation, the observation, the unwavering commitment to your values, often speaks louder than any public declaration. What battles have you fought that no one saw? How did you find your voice when others tried to silence you? Share your stories below, and remember to like and subscribe for more tales of resilience, unexpected triumph, and the quiet power of justice.